Hello viewers, welcome to this series, Compelling Reason. I'm Lizzie from Reasonable Faith UK. With me is Paul Lyndon Burtwell, an apologist and TV presenter for Reasonable Faith.
Hi Lizzie.
Welcome back, Paul. Great to have you with us. In this series, we present the latest scientific, mathematical, and philosophical information that can lead a rational person to a logical conclusion in answering this question, does God exist? In this episode, we want to explore the fine-tuning of the universe. Stay tuned to the end because we will be showing a short film that summarizes what we talk about. So Paul, what is fine-tuning in the context of the universe, and why is it even relevant to the question, does God exist?
Yeah, fine-tuning is one of the strongest possible evidences for the existence of God. And when we talk about fine-tuning, imagine you've got an old-fashioned radio and you want a specific channel to listen to. You turn that dial to the exact frequency, to that exact number, and then the radio station starts playing. That's what we mean by fine-tuning. And when scientists look at the universe and they see the constants and quantities of nature, the laws of physics, what they've discovered is that these laws have been finely tuned to an incomprehensible degree. And so what they're looking at there is very strong evidence that this fine tuning requires a fine tuner. And of course, if there's a fine tuner, that clearly points to the existence of a transcendent God.
Awesome. So what would be some examples that we could actually visibly see in the universe or in nature that represents fine-tuning?
Fine-tuning is everywhere where we look. But just one very easy example to share is we're sat down right now because of gravity, the force of gravity. And the force of gravity is finely tuned once again to an incomprehensible degree. If gravity were to change by 1 part in 10 to the power of 34, and that's 1 followed by 34 zeros, we wouldn't be here today. Gravity is what's holding us down. Gravity is what holds planets together and keeps planets in their orbit around the sun and in solar systems. Gravity is what's holding the universe together. And if gravity were to change by an infinitesimal amount, we wouldn't be here talking about it. So that's a very clear example of gravitational fine-tuning. And that fine-tuning was put in place by the Creator from the moment of creation. And so once again, very strong evidence that right from the start, there was a God behind it all.
Could you illustrate this for the viewers in a real world example?
Yeah, imagine you're walking through a forest late at night. You're lost, it's cold, you're damp.
Easy to imagine in the UK.
Absolutely. And you stumble across this cottage, and on the outside of the door, there's a sign saying, please come on in. You go on into the cottage and you see right in front of you a huge bowl of hot porridge, and it says eat me next to it. And so you're eating it. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. But you're still feeling damp, you're still feeling a bit miserable. And then you look over to the bathroom and realize that a bath has been run for you, and that bath water is not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. So you have a lovely warm bath. And when you get out of the bath, you see that there's towels hung for you on the radiator, and these towels have your initials embroidered on them. And you think that's strange, but you carry on anyway, dry yourself off. You go to the bedroom hoping to find some clothes. And as you go into the bedroom, you open the wardrobe and there are clothes in the wardrobe and they fit you precisely. So you put these clothes on. And just as you're about to leave the bedroom, you look on over and you see a photo frame on the side of the cabinet next to the bed. And in the photo frame is a picture of your family. And so immediately you would begin to think, not only was the person who owns the cottage expecting someone, they were expecting you. This is what we mean by fine-tuning, that the universe has been set up and designed in such a way that it wasn't just expecting any old creature, it was expecting human beings. It's as if somebody has set the universe up for a habitation for people created in the image of God.
So that sounded a little like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And I am actually aware there's a term in science or a concept called the Goldilocks zone.
Yes.
What is that? Could you explain?
So the Goldilocks zone can be applied to many different fine-tuning factors, but it's often applied to the position and location of planet Earth. that it's not too close to the sun so that it burns up, it's not too far away so that it freezes. We have a very large moon, but that's required for the water on the Earth to remain where it is. And so we've got all of these factors, all of these conditions in play that enable life on Earth to be possible. And scientists and cosmologists often declare on the news that they found all of these planets which could potentially inhabit life. But really all they're looking at there are planets that could potentially have water on them. They're not really talking about all of these 14 or 15 Goldilocks factors which are necessary for life to actually live on a planet. And so far, all that scientists have discovered by looking out in the universe is only one planet that's habitable by creatures like us, and that's planet Earth. And so this is what we're talking about, the Goldilocks. It's not too extreme in one way or the other. It is just right for life like ours to exist.
So David Deutsch, I think that's how you say his name, a physicist from Oxford University, he is quoted as saying, "The special features of the universe are surprising and unlikely." What do you think he meant by that?
Well, there are hundreds of fine-tuning factors that scientists have looked at, and the statistical probability is really actually quite difficult to describe, because we're talking about numbers that are so incomprehensible, so vast, so large, that it's difficult for most people to get their heads around them. So one example is the cosmological constant, and this is the expansion rate of the universe. Gravity acts like a brake. Gravity is always trying to pull the universe back, but we've got this factor called the cosmological constant, which is causing the universe to expand and grow. And it's finely tuned to 1 part in 10 to the power of 120. And so that's 1 followed by 120 zeros. Just to put that in context, 1 in 10 to the power of 3 is 1,000. 1 in 10 to the power of 6 is 1,000,000. So 1 in 10 to the power of 120, that's a number even I can't fathom. And that means that if the cosmological constant were altered by 1 part in 1 in 10 to the power of 120,
tiny.
a hair's breadth, we wouldn't be here discussing it. The universe wouldn't exist.
But how do scientists know that? Like, it's a pretty big claim to say if it was out by just this tiny little increment, either humans wouldn't be here or the stars would implode. What have scientists discovered, and what do they use to measure to actually be able to make these claims?
Scientists have all different kinds of tests that they use. They use telescopes, they use the Large Hadron Collider, and they use mathematical computer simulations such as the Millennium Project. You can kind of look this up online for yourself, actually. And in the Millennium Project, they've got these supercomputers that are mapping the universe and the mathematical features within the universe. And so they can kind of roll out various scenarios. Like if you were to increase gravity by a fraction, what would the universe look like? If you were to reduce the spin of an atom, what would the universe look like? They can factor all of these things into this mathematical computer program and look at what the universe would turn out like. And in most cases, the universe wouldn't exist, let alone have intelligent life in it.
So who first came up with this argument of fine-tuning as perhaps pointing to an intelligent designer?
So it was a man by the name of Robert H. Dickey in 1961, as he was researching the fundamental laws of nature, which were looking at kind of electromagnetism, gravity, the strong and weak nuclear force. As he began to research these forces of nature, the fundamental forces of nature, he discovered that they were finely tuned to an incomprehensible degree. And it really took him aback. It really shocked him. And then later on, Fred Hoyle came along, and he wasn't a fan of the fine-tuning
argument. Yeah, he was a
argument.
skeptic at first.
He was a skeptic at first, because once again, it points to God.
Mm-hmm.
But even he later on admitted that, hey, this fine-tuning exists, and it really does boil down to only one of 3 options. Either it's all due to random chance, or necessity, or design. And I think we can quickly rule out chance and necessity.
So I have a quote here by Fred Hoyle, and he said, "The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." And what conclusion was he talking about? That a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests a super intellect. So here's a guy who was skeptical. He's immersed in the information, he's observing what's going on, and then the evidence convinces him. So when you say there's necessity, chance, or design, could we explore those three options and why someone like Fred Hoyle ruled out the first two and actually then arrived at it probably points to design?
Yeah, so have you ever been to Las Vegas?
Actually,
you
in
have.
my 20s.
Wow, okay, so you know the casinos out there. And the difference between a Las Vegas casino and a casino in Europe is on a roulette wheel. In Europe, we have 37.
Well, I can't say I actually played anything.
Ah,
I just went for the whole strip, But anyway, as you were.
So a roulette wheel
Yeah.
has 37 pockets in Europe, but in America it has 38 pockets because they add an additional 00 number. And so you've got a 1 in 38 chance that when you throw the ball in and spin the wheel, that it's going to land on your number. And so chance states that you've got a 1 in 38 chance of winning if you spin the wheel and say put down a bet on 00. Okay, fine, that's your first bet. If you were to win a second time, okay, the probability of a second spin is still 1 in 38, but you now have to multiply that by the first win. So to win twice in a row, obviously the statistical probability skyrockets. Now, the fine-tuning in the universe, when we're talking about chance, we're talking about winning at roulette hundreds of times in a row, with 00 coming up every single time. And you can be sure if that happened in a real casino, the bouncers would...
Well, it's certainly never happened in our lifetime, has it?
No, absolutely not. And they would come and want to have a quiet word with you because they would think that there was something going on. Maybe you've magnetized the ball, stuck a magnet under 00. You'd fixed or rigged the game in some way. When we're looking at the universe, the fine-tuning of the constants and quantities of nature is so ridiculously precise that it looks like a put-up job. And so that's why it's such a strong argument for the existence of God and why chance really is not a good option. The second option, of course, is necessity. The universe has to be this way. Some people would call it the anthropic principle. We wouldn't be here talking about it unless it were this way. And that's absolutely true. But that still doesn't explain why the universe is the way it is. There has to be a reason that transcends the universe. And so the universe does not have to be this way. The universe doesn't even need to exist. And so necessity isn't a good objection to the fine-tuning of the argument. So if we rule out chance and if we rule out necessity, all we're left with is design. And if it looks like a rose and smells like a rose, you've probably got yourself a rose. And in the same way, if it looks like design, you've probably got yourself a designer.
I find it interesting that some scientists, in order to keep this option that it was by chance alive and kicking because they don't want to arrive at the conclusion that there was a God behind it all, they're actually pushing the argument over to speculation with their different theories rather than what's verifiable and observable. They would rather, because they don't want to acknowledge God, say, well, look over here, perhaps there's a multiverse. Could you talk a little bit about the multiverse and what that theory is?
So the multiverse theory is that there are potentially an infinite number of universes with all different kinds of physics and laws and constants and quantities of nature, and ours just happens to be the one that worked, which means that there is a universe generator somewhere that's pumping out trillions upon trillions upon trillions of universes, each with their own unique fine-tuning factors and laws of physics and nature. But this poses a huge problem for those people who want to get around the God problem. And that is, what's producing all of these universes? For one universe to pop into existence from nothing requires a designer and a creator. What about if you've got an almost untold multitude of universes that are just popping into existence? What's generating those? Where are the laws of physics and nature coming from for these to come into existence? And so it's a huge, huge problem for atheists.
So in terms of being rational and reasonable, and like we've spoken about in previous episodes, this idea of let's observe the universe around us, let's look at what's in nature, and then follow what it tells us to a logical conclusion. I just find it fascinating that they would rather argue for this idea of multiple universes popping out, which the probability is so low and it sounds quite preposterous, than just arrive at a perfectly reasonable conclusion that there is something so much bigger and smarter and eternal that created all of this. Why do you think there's so much resistance to just, as a scientist, saying, yes, there is a God and this would make sense?
Because science, as a discipline, wants to explain all things. And when you come to a transcendent creator of the universe that's beyond the realms of science, it's a dead end for science. And no scientist ever wants to meet a dead end. They always want to feel as though there's something more to discover. So one of the reasons that scientists, this is a legitimate reason from a discipline point of view, is that they want to keep on investigating and researching. But of course, you can't put God under a microscope.
Yeah,
That's
who
one of the
could explain
reasons.
God, right? Could we ever fully search him out?
And we can't do experiments on God to find out, in that sort of way. And so that's one of the reasons that materialistic scientists are against the idea of God. Another one, of course, is just sin. Yeah. They don't want God to exist. They don't want to have to answer to the God who created this universe. So that's another very important reason why many scientists are against the existence of God. It's not just for naturalistic reasons. It's because they don't want to have to be morally accountable to the creator of this universe.
So I love this quote from astrophysicist Michael Turner. He says, "The precision is as if one could throw a dart across the entire universe and hit a bullseye 1 millimeter in diameter on the other side." It's pretty specific.
Oh, it's very specific. Yeah. And I've got a quote here by Stephen Hawking. And everybody knows who Stephen Hawking, who he was. And of course, Stephen Hawking wasn't overly charmed by the idea of God. However, even Stephen Hawking has to admit this. He says, if the electric charge of the electron had been only slightly different, stars would have been unable to burn hydrogen and helium, or else they would not have exploded. It seems clear that there are relatively few ranges or values for the numbers, for the constants, that would allow for the development of any form of intelligent life. Most sets of values would give rise to universes that, although they might be very beautiful, would contain no one able to wonder at that beauty.
Amazing.
So very clearly, Stephen Hawking realizes that we live in a very unique universe, a universe that can produce and sustain intelligent life like ours, and that requires an almost infinitesimal amount of fine-tuning just so we can be here talking about it.
I think about the men who are studying this, discovering this, and they're building upon discoveries from previous scientists. They're immersed in this information, and as we've stated, many of them start out as skeptics, or they're starting out very neutral in how does this all work together and what started it. They're just exploring. And for them to arrive at these conclusions that it points to an intelligent designer, I kind of go, why wouldn't we, the common person who maybe studied science at school or maybe at university, listen to their feedback? They're immersed in the information and they reach a point where they say, the evidence is overwhelming, or the numbers are so specific that there doesn't seem any other logical answer.
Yeah, Dr. Hugh Ross, who's an astrophysicist, he states that within his own discipline and within cosmology, many of these scientists are coming to a faith either in God generally or in Jesus Christ specifically. And he's noting that within the discipline of cosmology, that many people are looking at the evidence of fine-tuning and looking at the evidence from the Big Bang and coming to the conclusion that there must be a transcendent creator behind all of this. So as you rightly said, this information is very widely known in the scientific community, but it's not filtering down to the general public just yet. But when it does, I imagine we're going to see hopefully a big revival of people turning back to God, because this evidence is so overwhelming that you really would have to put your head in the sand to ignore it.
So if this is interesting you and you would like to learn more about the evidence, the science, what's in our universe that points to the existence of God, follow along with this series, Compelling Reason. You can check out our website, godofhopetour.com. If you subscribe, you will receive Question of the Week, which is a very short, concise email asking the difficult questions and answering them. And we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to email in your question, we will answer it eventually. thanks for being with us here today, Paul. We have a short film we want to show you to summarize today's episode, Fine-Tuning of the Universe. Thanks for watching.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life-prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.